David, there's a question, even though it's on my channel, it's for you probably. When will you guys make a new series of Islamic videos, Boom Boom, Fake Islamic History? Is that on the horizon?
Fake Islamic history? No, I don't know. I'd have to think about it. We still have a lot of Boom Boom Room episodes to make.
Yeah, and I think they're talking about the historical criticism that we've been doing lately, like Jay Smith, myself, other people. And, we have to be careful, by the way. I mean, and Jay knows and others know, it's always good to uncover and unearth these research data that has been hidden, basically either in books or articles. Not a whole lot of Muslim knew that there is questions about the Qibla, for instance, or questions about Mecca and when Mecca emerged and the history of Islam and a question about the standard narrative and so on and so forth. But we also, it's always good to point these things out, meaning there is contradictions between what we know about Islam versus what the data support. I always like to err on the side of caution. What if tomorrow we discover something that could actually prove to us anything relevant to the standard Islamic narrative? So we have to leave the door also open for that. I'm not against, of course, exposing the fact that there are some contradictions, and it is, of course, on the Muslims to try to go and investigate things like, for instance, how do we know that Muhammad was born in 570? How do we know that Islam started in 610 AD? How do we know that he died in 632? How do we know that the Qibla initially was toward Jerusalem and then later was towards Mecca? And the list can go on and on and on. I mean, we rely on Islamic sources that were written at a later time. There is a lack of eyewitness accounts. But this is just the direction I like to take myself. AP, any thoughts on this?
No, nothing further to add. Okay.
Endorsed.
Yeah, endorsed.
David, are you endorsing it too?
No.
Yeah. Of course, David would. He cannot endorse anything.
Endorse my own stuff, that's it.
No, really, seriously, you did a debate. I know it's a friendly debate with Jay about the existence of Muhammad. Tell us why, for instance, just reiterate to people why you take the position that, no, Muhammad did exist.
At the end of the day, I just really believe it's too much. It's too much stuff, right? The story, the idea that Muhammad was invented later, right? So if you want to say that he's invented some later time, during the time of some ruler, and they invent this story about Muhammad, the number of problems that they invent, and not just the number of problems they invent, but the number of sources about these problems they invent. So notice, and this is an example I give, but if you're saying that the story of Muhammad is just invented at this point, well, guess what? There never was any satanic verses. They never happened, right? When you line up the stories about the satanic verses, you clearly see from the earliest until the latest that they water it down and water it down and water it down and water it down and water it down. So at first, Satan actually puts it in Muhammad's mouth. Muhammad speaks it. Later sources, it's just Satan speaks it and imitates Muhammad's voice to make it sound. Still later, suddenly the story is taken out and the pagans are bowing down in honor of the revelation, but they don't even say what the revelation is, right? It slowly gets watered down. But guess what? None of that ever happened. Nothing there. So you're saying that someone invents the story about Muhammad delivering and invents the story about it being watered down and invents another story about it being watered down and why are you inventing any of that? If you're coming up with an entire history of how this thing got watered down, then it must be embarrassing at the time you're inventing the story. Well, why in the name of common sense are you inventing the story? Why are you inventing 50 different sources on this story that you're made up? And notice that's just the example of the satanic verses. You go through the various Hadith collections and so on. There's so many stories just piled upon just massively mounted up. And then you look and it's not just Muhammad, it's the supporting cast, it's the wives, it's the next generation. And so they've got you got Abu Bakr and he has kids and then they have kids and they keep records of all these people and what they did and so on. If that is all just invented, this is the most amazing conspiracy. This is the mother of all conspiracy theories. There's never been a conspiracy theory that involves more conspiracy than this. Like none. Like if you take the biggest conspiracy theory in the history of humanity, you'd have to multiply it times 100 million to get what you're required for Islam to just be invented in some later time and then writing all this back. With that said, there are problems with the standard narrative. I grant there are all kinds of problems with the standard narrative, but I just can't bring myself to say he's made up. He's a fabrication.
Yeah, the position that I always like to take is that there was somebody and something happened, and there is embellishment and re-embellishment and improvement to the story. And maybe there were a couple of factions that held on to certain parts, others distance themselves from him, and you begin to see variations of that story maybe. But you're right, at a later time you begin to see these improvements taking place. For instance, if you look at the tafsir, the commentaries, you'll see that the earlier commentators relied more heavily on opinions, and you get to the 7th, 8th century of Islam and you begin to see they reinforce opinions now by alleged hadiths, alleged sayings of Muhammad. In other words, they kind of like figured out the weaknesses and they began to plug those holes, if you wish, holes in that narrative. AP?
Let me just add one more thing. I just wanted to add, I want to point this out because I know two guys, both Jay Smith and Robert Spencer, who deal with this issue. I just wanted to clarify, even though I believe Muhammad existed, and I can't imagine a scenario where I would not believe that anymore, just because of the sheer volume of the information and just how much it would boggle my mind to think that they just made up all of this stuff. Even though I believe in Muhammad, it's still a good idea to push the idea and to press Muslims on. How do you even know that Muhammad existed? Look at all these problems with your narrative, even about Muhammad's existence. And so, you have to push that because you want Muslims to be able to defend their own position, and they need to defend their own prophet, and they need to be the ones answering some of these problems. Like if Muhammad's going around Arabia doing all this stuff, why don't you have more? Why has no one ever heard of him? Why isn't Mecca on these ancient maps and so on? So they do have to answer that. So you do have to press the issue. So I just wanted to be clear on that even though I believe Muhammad existed, go ahead and press it. Now, AP?
Yeah, AP?
I think David makes some great points. I want to add to that a few things. If you ask me, I would say I'm not an expert in the field. I don't concern myself too much with the historicity of Muhammad. But when you think about it, it is almost, I would say it is almost impossible that Muhammad did not exist. And we have little to no reason to assume that he didn't exist or to conclude that he didn't exist. There's simply too much going on. The Muslims were not even united enough at the very beginning to really pull through with this, with such a conspiracy of inventing a figure who. The earliest sources that we have about Muhammad, the external sources, non-Muslim sources, come from the 630s AD, which is just after Muhammad's death, and only at that time the Muslims were already too divided internally. They became more divided within those same generations that must have witnessed Muhammad over those decades. It is simply inconceivable to me that despite all those divisions, these people would somehow cling to a made-up figure or a made-up myth of a figure called Muhammad and actually go through with that without ever questioning it. We have too many sources that lead back to Muhammad. We have remnants of certain writings, certain documents that are said to have been written in the time of Muhammad. Certain companions left these it's called sahifa, which are the very primitive forms of hadith collections that are supposed to lead back to Muhammad's time, where people who were directly with Muhammad made some very primitive attempts at recording the things that he said. I don't know, it's just, we have a lot of historical figures that we say they existed, and we have much less evidence for their existence than we have for Muhammad. So by historical standards, looking also at the historical consensus on the historicity of Muhammad, I don't think we have any reason to conclude that Muhammad didn't exist. That said, I also don't really concern myself with that issue very much. I focused more on whether Muhammad existed or not. We have a Muhammad, a historical, a central figure within the Islamic religion, and that central figure, based on the claims of Islam itself, did and said a few things, and those things are problematic, and we need to address those. The historicity is very much a secondary issue, I would say.